sir.
Ah, Black Cloud, you've been doing unauthorized rain dances again, huh?
Take a look at the scope, sir.
What the hell is that?
The version of the Final Countdown you saw is one of the most audacious concepts ever approved by the United States Navy. Today we're counting down 15 facts about the Final Countdown. Stick around for number 1, because a camera operator went over the side of the USS Nimitz, and what saved him is the only reason this film got finished.
The Final Countdown took us to a really exciting part of my life.
Really? 15. Kirk Douglas's son produced the film and had to talk his father into it. The Final Countdown exists because of Peter Douglas. Kirk Douglas's son was the driving force behind the entire production, the one who developed the script, attracted the Navy's cooperation, and secured financing against long odds. The problem was his father. Kirk Douglas was skeptical about appearing in a film produced by his own son. He worried it would look like nepotism. A famous father handed a role by family connection rather than earned by the project's merit. Peter had to make a genuine case for why Kirk was the right actor for Captain Yelland. He eventually succeeded.
Is there something you've held back?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing, Captain.
Once Kirk Douglas was on board and on set, the concern evaporated entirely. He commanded the film the way Yelland commanded the Nimitz, with an authority that left no room for doubt. The man who had to be convinced he belonged in the movie ended up owning every scene he walked into. 14. The Navy controlled the entire shooting schedule. The U.S. Navy did not simply loan the USS Nimitz to the production, it maintained operational control throughout filming. Department of Defense officials reviewed the script before agreeing to cooperate, and once they signed on, they attached a condition that was non-negotiable. The film schedule would be entirely dependent on the Navy's on-location consultant, William Miklos. If the Navy needed the ship, filming stopped. If operational readiness required a change of plans, the production adapted. There was no argument, no negotiation, no studio pressure that could override that arrangement. The filmmakers were guests aboard a working nuclear aircraft carrier, and the Navy never let them forget it. Production took place across 2 separate 5-week periods in 1979 at Naval Air Station Key West, Naval Station Norfolk, and off the Florida Keys. Every day of shooting existed at the pleasure of the United States Department of Defense. 1348. Real sailors were credited in the film. The Final Countdown did not hire extras to populate the decks and corridors of the Nimitz. It used the actual crew. 48 U.S. Navy personnel from the USS Nimitz were officially credited in the closing credits for their performances as extras, background artists, or actors.
But they haven't attacked Pearl Harbor yet.
Some had speaking parts. The mess deck scene in particular was captured using real sailors who had just finished eating lunch. The production asked who wanted to be in a film. The remaining crew sat back down, and the scene was rehearsed in minutes. A cheap cassette player was used to play the sound effect that would cause the characters to react. When it played, the sailors threw their trays and grabbed their heads. What looks like a tightly choreographed crowd reaction on screen was a group of actual Navy personnel improvising in their own mess hall. The authenticity of the Final Countdown is not manufactured, it is literal. 12. The Zeros were World War II. Trainer planes in disguise, the Japanese Zero fighters that appear in the Final Countdown are not Zeros. No airworthy examples of the Mitsubishi S6M0 existed in the numbers the production required, and finding even one that could safely perform aerobatic maneuvers alongside F-14 Tomcats was not realistic. The solution was the North American T-6 Texan, a World War II trainer aircraft used by both American and Allied forces. The T-6 were modified externally to approximate the Zero's profile, painted in Japanese markings, and filmed from angles that minimized the visual differences. From the side, the illusion held well enough. From above, the T-6's distinctive wing shape gave it away to anyone who knew what to look for. The Tomcats, flying at near stall speed with wings fully extended to stay in the same frame as the propeller-driven trainers, were barely moving by their own standards. It remains the only time in cinema history that jet fighters have engaged propeller aircraft in a genuine on-camera dogfight. 11. The dogfight nearly ended in a mid-air collision. The aerial dogfight sequence between the F-14 Tomcats and the T-6 Texans was among the most physically dangerous footage ever shot for a Hollywood production. The aircraft were operating at the edge of their respective performance envelopes, the Texans at full throttle, the Tomcats at stall speed, which left almost no margin for error on either side. At the conclusion of the sequence, the two aircraft playing the zero roll spun away from each other at the end of a maneuver. By sheer chance, they missed each other. The near collision was not planned, not choreographed, and not something anyone on the ground could have prevented. The aerodynamics of the sequence created an outcome nobody had anticipated. What appears on screen as a crisp and controlled action sequence ended one moment away from a fatal accident over open water, no safety net of any kind below. 10. An F-14 pulled out barely 100 feet above the ocean. During the sequence where a Zero fires on one of the Tomcats, real U.S. Navy pilot Lieutenant Commander Richard Farrell executed a maneuver that came within 100 feet of the ocean's surface. To position the F-14 on the tail of the low and slow Zero, a targeting position pilots call the 6 o'clock, Farrell had to push the jet into a low-altitude arc that ended in what witnesses described as a screaming recovery barely above the water. The script called for the Japanese pilot to force the F-14 toward the ocean. Farrell delivered exactly that, without a stunt double, without a safety altitude, and without any realistic margin for error. If the aircraft's systems had responded even slightly differently, the sequences in the finished film, Farrell flew it himself, pulled out at 100 feet, and continued the mission. The Navy's definition of pushing the envelope and Hollywood's definition turned out to be identical. 9. A camera operator was pitched off the flight deck. The first attempt to film a jet takeoff from the USS Nimitz ended before the camera rolled on a usable frame. The jet blast from an F-14 launching off the carrier's flight deck hit the camera position with a force the crew had not adequately accounted for. The camera operator was pitched off the deck by the blast. A restraining net below the flight deck level caught him. He survived. The production paused, assessed what had gone wrong, and attempted the shot again. The second attempt produced the same result. The camera and operator went over the side again and were caught by the same net. After 2 attempts with the same outcome, the production rethought its approach to the takeoff sequences. The footage eventually captured for the film was obtained from safer positions and angles that kept the camera crew on the deck. The restraining nets were not a contingency. They were the reason the film's cinematographer still had a crew. 8. The F-14 pilots responded to Catherine Ross with a sign. During filming aboard the Nimitz, the aircrew of Fighter Squadron VF-84, the Jolly Rogers, extended an invitation to Catherine Ross. They asked her to meet them at a hotel. She declined. The pilots of VF-84 registered their displeasure during a flight sequence by holding up a sign with a message for the actress, written in terms the production documentation records as profane. The sign was aimed at the camera during filming. It made it into the dailies, the raw, unedited footage reviewed each day by the director and producers. Ross reportedly found out and was furious. The sign did not make the final cut. The Jolly Rogers continued flying their missions. The production continued shooting. Catherine Ross and the fighter squadron completed the film without any further documented communication between them. The incident remains one of the more unusual entries in the history of on-set diplomatic failures. 7. An emergency landing was filmed and used in the movie during operations aboard the USS Nimitz. An actual in-flight emergency occurred. A pilot was forced to make an emergency landing on the carrier, a high-stakes recovery under real conditions with no margin for error and no movie logic to soften the outcome. The production crew was present in filming. The Navy permitted them to capture the recovery on camera. The sequence was reviewed, deemed usable, and cut directly into the finished film. What audiences see as a dramatically timed piece of action was not staged, not rehearsed, and not written into any script. A real pilot made a real emergency landing on a real nuclear aircraft carrier, and the film crew happened to be rolling. The final countdown contains an unplanned emergency landing because the U.S. Navy doesn't pause real operations for Hollywood schedules, and occasionally those operations produce exactly the footage a film needs. 6. The Pearl Harbor footage came from Troma. The production had full access to the most advanced naval aviation assets in the world. What it did not have was 1941 for the sequences depicting the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The film turned to existing footage rather than attempt a costly period recreation. The battle scenes are reproduced in monochrome from Tora, the 1970 war epic produced with considerable historical detail. The borrowed footage featured Aichi D-3 A-Val dive bombers, Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, and Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, aircraft that had appeared in the earlier film as part of an authentic recreation. The Final Countdown wove that archival material into its own story without attempting to match or extend it with new period photography. A film set across two eras built its past from someone else's work and its present from the most expensive military hardware in the world. The gap between those two approaches is visible in every frame. 5. The director never made another film. The Final Countdown was the last theatrical film Don Taylor ever directed. Taylor had a solid career behind him. He had directed Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Damien Omen 2 before taking on this production, but whatever combination of factors came together on the Nimitz appears to have ended his feature directing career. The shoot was not without friction, budget overruns, scheduling conflicts driven by the Navy's operational needs, tensions between producers, crew, and the star, all contributed to a production that ran over by a week and generated internal conflict documented by the production's own associate producer. Taylor did not direct another theatrical feature after 1980. The film he made was moderately successful at the box office and developed a genuine cult following in the years that followed. He didn't get to see where it landed. By the time audiences found it, he had already moved on to television, where he worked until his death in 1998. 4. The associate producer left to found Troma Entertainment. Lloyd Kaufman served as associate producer on The Final Countdown and also appears briefly in the film as a minor character. His experience on the production was not a happy one. Kaufman, who served as unit production manager, was frustrated throughout by what he described as unnecessary costs and unreasonable demands that hampered progress at every stage. The friction between the Hollywood production and the Navy's operational realities, combined with the internal tensions among the producers and crew, made the shoot a difficult environment to manage. When The Final Countdown wrapped, Kaufman was done with working inside that kind of system. He set out as an independent producer and established Troma Entertainment, the independent studio, known for films like The Toxic Avenger, made entirely outside Hollywood's commercial infrastructure. One of cinema's most proudly low-budget independent studios was founded in direct response to the impossible logistics of filming on a nuclear aircraft carrier. 3. The Nimitz crew had to be convinced history was being made. The USS Nimitz in 1979 was the largest warship in the world, a nuclear-powered supercarrier with a crew of several thousand. Its sailors had never been asked to appear in a major Hollywood film. Many of them didn't entirely understand why they were being asked now. The production worked steadily to bring the crew on board with the project, not just as extras, but as genuine participants in what the film was attempting. The mess deck scene, the hangar bay sequences, the flight deck operations, all of it required the real crew to behave naturally in front of cameras while doing their actual jobs. The 48 sailors who received screen credits were the visible portion of a much larger group whose cooperation made the production physically possible. The most authentic naval footage in Hollywood history was captured because thousands of real U.S. Navy sailors decided the whole thing was worth their time. Most of them never saw the finished film. 2. Kirk Douglas had to be filmed separately from the carrier. Despite appearing to command the Nimitz with total authority throughout the film, there were significant portions of Kirk Douglas's performance captured away from the ship's actual operational environment. The production's 2 separate 5-week filming periods in 1979 were structured to accommodate both the Navy's schedule and the practical realities of filming a major star aboard a fully operational warship. Interior scenes, many of the bridge sequences, and footage requiring controlled conditions were shot at dry dock rather than at sea. The seamless continuity between the carrier's actual flight operations and Douglas's command performance is a product of editing two separate realities stitched together into a single convincing illusion of a man running a nuclear aircraft carrier. Douglas never piloted an F-14, never directed an actual launch sequence, and never stood on the flight deck during a live catapult shot. He looked like he could have done all of it. That is what movie stars are for. 1. The camera operator went over the side twice. The first time the production attempted to film a jet takeoff from the Nimitz flight deck, the camera operator was blown off the deck by the jet blast and caught in the safety net below. The crew retrieved him, assessed the situation, and set up again. The second attempt produced the identical result. The same operator was pitched off the same deck by the same force and caught by the same net twice on the same day. The safety nets below the flight deck of a nuclear carrier exist for exactly this kind of incident. They are standard operational equipment, not a Hollywood precaution, but their existence is also a reminder of how much force is present on a carrier deck during flight operations and how completely that environment was beyond the production's ability to control or predict. A film about a crew managing the impossible turned out to require a crew managing the impossible. The camera operator survived both falls. The footage of jet launches came from safer angles. Some lessons cost more than others to learn. A film that put Hollywood on the most powerful warship in the world and learned very quickly who was in charge. Which fact hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that went to places most productions never could. Until next time.